Much like all history, that of video games is remembered most as the winners that stood the test of time. Some games and systems became such monumental hits that if you weren't there at the time, you could easily just not be aware of the mountain of other titles you're stepping over. It's easy to see this happen in real time, and it'll happen to games that you hold dear now. For example, the Nintendo 64 for me was a juggernaut with lots of classics, but now it's just seen as a system with like 5 Nintendo games that people are aware of, and if you're lucky, someone might even be aware of like 3 or so rare games that were developed for it. That's it. All the rest have been demoted to being games that might get a YouTube retrospective titled The Best Games You've Never Played. And this isn't even limited to games that saw their prominence in an era before broadband internet. I'm now starting to see lots of people not even be aware of games like Braid or Fez that basically dominated internet discourse for a long time. It seemed like everyone had played them and had an opinion on them, but not anymore. Being a perpetually obscure game is a fate that most games will ultimately just be given. Just give it enough time. But some games are basically dead on arrival when it comes to this, and for once I'm not talking about Codename Steam. Buffer's evolution is, well, I mean just look at its Wikipedia page, that sums it up. Though I guess it's not completely obscure since this is one of those WonderSwan games fortunate enough to even have an English Wikipedia page. The WonderSwan library is so sad to look back on. This is its legacy over here. What we have is a game exclusive to the WonderSwan, a system which sold alright in Japan, but never got a chance to reach the rest of the globe. This is an original IP, with no brand recognition to get eyes on it, made by a seemingly no-name studio, and this game is still not getting any kind of re-releases. It's doomed. Hell, we even saw Gimmick get brought back recently, so anything is possible, but I'm not holding my breath for Buffer's evolution to get a port. The reason I stated a seemingly no-name studio is because this game was developed by Koto Laboratory, a studio founded in 1996 by the late, great Gunpei Yokoi. If you're not familiar with Yokoi, he did a lot, frankly too much for such a short life. But he was responsible for so much of Nintendo's success during the latter half of the 20th century. But the short answer is he made the Game & Watch, he made the Game Boy, he made the first ever D-pad, but even that's selling him short, he did so much more. Anyway, to cut his life history really short, he left Nintendo and then made the Bandai WonderSwan, which he unfortunately didn't live long enough to see hit the market. Look, I promise I won't spend every WonderSwan video reiterating who Gunpei Yokoi is, but this time it's really justified. You see, the Bandai WonderSwan was developed by 2 companies, one of which was Bandai, but the other was Koto Laboratory. Buffer's Evolution wasn't just a game developed by a company that was founded by Yokoi, it was developed by a company that helped create the WonderSwan itself. This is a big deal. Well, it should be, but unfortunately it isn't. Though just to cut any kind of misinformation, it doesn't appear Yokoi himself worked on this game, and that makes sense due to him passing 2 years before its release. But his message of lateral thinking is all over this game. That's cause this game, in addition to being made for a system that was super out of date in 1999, and arguably even out of date a decade earlier since battery guzzlers with full color backlit displays were already out long before this. This game is all about squeezing out as much as it can from a frankly very limited amount of actual content. But first, I'll cover the story. Well, that's a misnomer. I mean, I'll cover the setting. Because aside from the opening wordless video and some text in the manual, there's no story here. There is no escalation in the setting, no bosses, not even a congratulations screen saying you saved the day or whatever. This is a game all about gameplay. But some people who worked on it were clearly obsessed with lore, and they snuck it in where they could. This seems like it takes place on a future Earth, and society has made lots of machine and animal hybrids as bizarre cyborgs. Though thankfully this isn't a Dr. Monroe situation, and it won't dwell on the horrible implications. Instead, these animal cyborgs are made to do various tasks, and made to replace humans in presumably menial fields that are ripe for automation. Once again, the game isn't dwelling on the horrible implications of sentient creatures being forced into servitude. But somehow, something disastrous occurred from cramming robot parts into animals. And that's that there is a large amount of scrap now in the scrapyards due to cyborgs being useless junk over time. I'll choose to assume that these are powered down creations rotting in the scrapyards, and not still living cyborgs rotting away in agony. Anyway, the always industrious humans found a way to turn this into a form of entertainment that I'll choose to ignore the ethics of. Cyborgs are now being repaired, and they're racing each other for people's enjoyment. The race is about progressing through branching courses, finding the best route, and competing for the best time. And then the manual asks if these creatures will be scrapped or hailed as heroes. And now it's a race against an invisible enemy. Cool, none of that comes up in the game itself. This manual also says that these animal cyborgs are called buffers by the people, which is why the game has such a weird name. We also get a small footnote to say that robotic modifications on humans is prohibited, which I'll choose not to dwell on the ethics of either. For you story enthusiasts, that's it. Now it's time for the real meat of the game. The three buffers we have are Lion type, Hawk type, and Rhino type. Each has slightly different stats, but they all have the same base speed strangely enough. This might seem counterintuitive, but if one was faster there'd be no reason to choose the others. The differences are more about their endurance, their power, and their jumping distance. The Rhino can get hit by more enemies, and is more able to quickly destroy these blocks, whereas the Hawk is better at jumping around, and the Lion is the middle ground. They're a fun trio, and I alternated between all three because I don't really have a favourite. Though that's kind of a lie, because the Hawk is my favourite, I just didn't want to exclusively use that one. Especially when the Rhino is the best in certain situations. The Lion's also there, I guess. You'll start the game with all three, however you're limited in everything else. The game is about equipping different items to make your characters more agile or formidable, but you begin with nothing. And that's because this is a game that has one of the worst first impressions I've ever seen in a 2D platformer. You'll run, jump, and slide, none of which are particularly fast, and claw your way to the end of the first level, while a giant timer in the top right sometimes shows you how long you've been taking. And it'll be even longer if you know what you're meant to be doing, because your first few playthroughs of these levels, you're not actually trying to set a speedrun high score. Instead, you'll be looking for these numbered healing capsules. They're big and obvious, but they're also kind of easy to miss given the multiple routes each level has. Thankfully they're numbered, and backtracking is easy to do here, unlike a certain other speed-focused game that wants you to go on a scavenger hunt. These healing capsules will for the rest of the game remain just that, once you've collected one, that you can come back to it to heal yourself on replays. But first, you need to go through all 10 of these per level to unlock that level's specific item. For the first level, it's this giant wheel, and I love it. Going forward, you can equip this to your character and enjoy the wonderful boost of speed it gives you, at the expense of the animator probably crying. If all you really want is some decent times, or to do a speedrun on a clean file, that's basically all you need. If you're one of those speedrunners, please forgive me, I know you also use the glider. But the point is, you can have an enjoyable game with just this item immediately given to you. However, if you really want to get a feel of what this game's about, you'll want to go for every item in the game, which means that you have to play every level as a scavenger hunt for 10 healing items. There's even more items, have these little dash emblems, and there are 3 of those hidden per level. Thankfully they're numbered as well, and there's 1 of them per segment of a level, more on that later. So I hate to break it to you, but this game initially presents itself as a really big commitment that you have to work towards before the really fun part of the game begins. You're going to be looking for lots of small hidden things. Have fun! Or you could just hack the game and start with every item or something. I guess that's also an option. Though I will forever be glad I spent my first few hours just searching endlessly until I found everything, because it gave me a sense of familiarity with the levels and mechanics here. The levels of this game's main mode, titled Enduro mode, are deceptively simple. There's no special gimmicks, just regular terrain and water And there's some special gimmicks, oh damn it. Look, one has a moving train and there's another that has strong winds pushing you up because of a sandstorm, but other than that the levels are pretty simple, and I don't mean that as a disparagement. They're wonderfully crafted with different rounds, and they're all unique and memorable. You just won't find levels that break away from this and do their own silly gimmicks, sandstorm notwithstanding. If we lived in the good timeline where this game was a success, there would be an endless amount of content with some kind of Buffer's evolution maker, since the levels are that simple to create. Unfortunately, we're in a timeline where we only have the few levels graciously given to us by the developers before they went to obscure game jail. I'm going to start with the bad, but it will end on a positive note, I promise. We only have 9 original levels, 3 for each quote-unquote world. The worlds are A, B, and C, though if you look in the manual they're actually called Stadium, Island, and Ruins. But we also have worlds D, E, and F, with another 9 levels total. That's because those are the same stages, but in reverse. In most other games, this would seem like pointless filler, but here, it works better than I've ever seen recycling done in a game. These levels are extremely vertical, just look at the maps the game gives you. For starters, traversing up and down feel a lot different than just left and right, but also we have a multitude of items here that I'll go into more detail with. This completely changes strategies, and makes these backwards levels feel incredibly unique. Maybe you'd want an item to fall faster, or one that shoots you up to the top of a level. This really does justify itself, and I am so glad we have these extra backwards levels. I also appreciate that the artist here went to the effort to give the latter 9 levels unique icons. You could easily imagine him just using the same art but flipping it, or maybe putting a star or something on it. But no, we have unique icons here because the game's developers really cared. The fact that we only have 18 short levels here though is initially disappointing. But replaying these for the best times is an addictive thrill. The game knows this too, because you won't even see the game's credits until you beat a level with a fast enough time that the game congratulates you with this. And on that note, the credits here seem like a speedrun themselves, look how quick that is. These credits specifically require that the game gives you a bronze, silver, gold, or super ranking, which are tricky, but once you get them, the game will play a video of one of the devs getting it as well, so you have an idea of how to improve your time even further. According to the manual, there are also beginner videos there that play after you unlock all the regular items, and that these show you where the dash emblems are. That would have been great information for me to know before I painstakingly looked all over for them. You see, once I realized this game was all about collectible hunting, I began hunting immediately, before I knew the game just handed you a cheat sheet. But you know, it was really kind of the developers to give you this as well, because the best parts of the game require all this preamble. All those dash emblems unlock a much faster suit for your character to wear, and this makes movement a blast. And it doesn't count as an item either, it's your default state, meaning it can be combined with other items. So yeah, it's in your best interest to look for everything so you can blaze on super fast. It's a fun reward for completion, and the game's manual makes sure to tell you to go for this, so you always have something to strive towards. People playing this game back in the day would have known there was so much extra awaiting them than what their first initial impressions gave them. It might seem counterintuitive for the devs of this game to show you speedrun videos themselves on how to optimally play this game, but there's even more challenges beyond beating the developers, because this 1999 handheld game could connect to the internet so you could share high scores with the community of other players. That's all thanks to Wondergate. Just connect your WonderSwan to your mobile phone or your personal handy phone system. If you push yourself, each of these levels can be beaten in like under a minute, though it takes a lot of work and routing just to get there. The first part of obtaining those lofty goals is to learn which items are best for each situation, and there are 18 in total, though they're not all created equally, and some are more for destroying obstacles than they are for speed. Though of that, some are nice to have, like this energy blast shooter is good on occasion, And my favourite offensive tool is these drill hands, which also let you climb up walls. I love them. But other than the handful for offense, they're basically all here for land, air, or water mobility. The wheel is a good all-rounder, though it will be seriously made redundant in the endgame, as its speed increase is minimal when compared to things like the dash suit. For fast speeds, you'll need to rely on things like the rocket jet, that has you fly horizontally across the screen, though it can kind of break the game, though it comes with the consequence of making sure you have to dodge all these enemies that you barely have time to react to. It's only really useful in horizontal stretches, which the game will break up with verticality. For the verticality, it's the actual traditional rocket that you'll need, and this thing's a blast. Just make sure you're positioning it most efficiently and don't bonk your head on anything that hurts. And if you're playing this in reverse, make sure you equip the super heavy armor so you fall quickly and break the blocks along the way. For water, we have ways to swim in the water or ride on top of it. Look, I don't need to explain this. It's the same as land and air, except water slows you down when you're not using an item. This is also the kind of game that has no air meter, so you have nothing to worry about. You'll probably only stick to a few handful of items, but I appreciate the inclusion of so many, as it means you'll always feel like you're progressing and unlocking something, and it makes for some fun experimentation. Plus, some of this is served better in the other mode I'll touch on later. To activate these items, all you do is press the face button that isn't jump, and it'll activate the next item. You can equip up to 2 per level, and you start each level in the neutral no item state. Press the button once to activate item 1, press it again while item 1 is in use to activate item 2, and pressing it again returns you to the neutral state. At first I didn't quite like this, and I wish I had 2 separate buttons for this, which could technically be feasible on a WonderSwan, though it would be an ergonomic nightmare. But I grew to love this weird cycling of items, and it adds more of a degree of strategizing, as you'd want to set the most important item, the one you'd use while running and jumping, to your first slot, and then the second slot is the one that you'll be using less often ideally. Though I'm not completely dedicated to this mechanic, if we are somehow gifted with a new version of this game, I'd take back my love of the limited mechanics here for a more conventional setup that has 3 buttons. I just like to make the best out of a bad situation, which is unfortunately the landscape WonderSwan's number of face buttons accessible. Though sliding is the more obvious consequence here, and it could have been easily circumvented, as other games with 2 face buttons have found ways around it, like the latter NES and Game Boy Mega Man entries. Here, instead of down and the jump button operating a slide, it's done so you have to first be in free fall to slide. So if you're jumping or falling in general, hold down and you'll immediately slide after hitting the ground. It's by no means a deal breaker, but it's a bit awkward, and it's something I never got comfortable with. It basically means that if you want to slide, you first have to waste a second by needlessly jumping, and then you can traverse the small tunnel. The jump button takes priority over sliding at all times, so even though it's the same 2 buttons as Mega Man, you have to jump first every single time. It's, it's not great, but at the end of the day, this is my single biggest issue with the controls or overall gameplay here, so that's not too bad, is it? Enough on those gameplay quirks though, I need to touch on this game's other mechanics that are beautiful for a speedrun game like this, and they really punish you for not being careful. First, we don't have death pits or anything here, so there's no incentive to take your finger off the directional buttons. And we don't really have traditional enemies, they all kind of function as bumpers that push you back, but also damage you. Damage is represented with your character sprite getting darker, which frankly isn't ideal on a non-backlit system, but I appreciate the dedication to a clean HUD. The damage not only kills you and stops you run if you accumulate enough, obviously, but even during the subsequent stages of damage, your character will slow down a bit, and they can transform back to normal involuntarily whenever you're using an item. It punishes skilled players that are trying to go for a fast time, while still letting beginners learn the ropes and level layout. And that is the only real difficulty here as a platformer. If you're playing this game with the intent of not going back for those blisteringly fast speeds, and you just want to play the game once, you'll find a platformer that is really easy with some levels that have long stretches of nothing. but the game knows what it is. When you start a level, you get a voiced countdown timer.
3, 2, 1.
You end the level with checkerboards, and those aforementioned long stretches of nothing, those segment the level into smaller chunks, and while you're speeding on through those hallways, the game will give you your time. These areas are called checkpoints, but they don't function as traditional video game checkpoints. If you have to restart a level, it'll send you all the way back to the beginning. They're checkpoints in the sense that they divide the level, so you know how well you do at each checkpoint, so you can know how to improve times in a replay. It's almost a shame that this game is about never halting movement, because the art is really nice, but you'll never really get the time to appreciate it fully. First of all, the backgrounds are all sublime and show the sense of variety of these racetracks. And it's not just 3 worlds with different aesthetics, or even 9 original levels that are each unique. No, the segmented nature of the levels of checkpoints gives us new beautiful vistas multiple times in a single stage. My favourite example is how this one feels like entering an ancient tomb after escaping a sandstorm in a desert. But we have lots of smaller examples like this village section in the islands, or this giant ship, and these only take up about a third of each of their levels. Given how short the levels are, they didn't need to do this. It's not like you'd get tired of the same aesthetics for a full minute and a half or so, but like I keep saying, the artists really cared with this game. More evidence is seen in the really detailed sprites of this game, which have a lot more animation than they need to. You don't get an idle animation per se, the cyborgs stand pretty lifelessly, though they still went to the effort to show the metallic light moving a little on their body if you stand still. I assume this is meant to show off their breathing and how the sun reflects against it. You'd almost never see this during normal play, but it's still here. These 3 buffers also have detailed running animations, even though most of the game you'll be using items that completely change their animation set. And all those, they look great too, but the main one is my favourite. The buffers jump with so much build up, and they have a graceful landing. Their arms and legs are perfectly in tune and is a sight to behold. And I almost want to say this is misplaced effort, as this all could have gone to make the game longer or tighten up the gameplay faults I have, but no, I don't want to live in a world without these sprites. It even accounts for things like slopes, where we can see the character's legs at different elevations, and we have these tiny in-between frames for switching direction that are not needed at all, but I adore their inclusion. And it's not just the visual artists that cared, the composition of this game is great. Every song is a bop. I genuinely did not know music this good could come out of a WonderSwan. It is amazing. Something I'm less in awe about though is the secondary mode of the game. It's alright. I could end it all there, but now I'll give you the decency of explaining what it is. Titled SS mode, which is unfortunate, the goal here is to defeat every enemy in these small levels that are designed entirely differently. Speed is still a focus here, and your goal is still to get high scores, but these levels are all claustrophobic and filled with boxes that must be destroyed to reach enemies. It takes an entirely different approach, and it makes fantastic use out of items you'd never use during Enduro mode. It also highly rewards strategizing for the most efficient kill of every enemy, as the levels don't end with a traditional goalpost, instead it has what it calls the finish ball, and this will spawn in a set place once every enemy is defeated, so route your course well so you don't have to spend the final few seconds running all the way to it. The bottom of the screen will let you know how many enemies are left, and the timer is ever present here in a location that never obscures your view, which I need to commend them on, because if the game's main timer here was in the top right, it would ruin the joy of this robot-destroying excursion. These parallel the main game as we also have 18 levels, though thankfully the last 9 are not just the first 9 in reverse. Though it did scare me at first, because you start those on the right hand side of the screen. And I'm really glad they didn't recycle these, because these are much smaller courses, with way less verticality, and they're over incredibly quickly. It's a step up above a WarioWare microgame, but not by much. These are very bite-sized challenges. On average, I'd say around 10 to 25 seconds. So honestly, I wish we had more than 18 stages here. This could have been a really meaty side mode, but as it stands, it's just an alright one. I'm glad it's here, but it is a small distraction and not much else. But still, Buffer's Evolution's main campaign is phenomenal, and it could be the basis of a much larger series. Though it's been doomed to obscurity, and I don't see it bouncing out of this anytime soon. It's a game where my biggest problems are it leaves me wanting more. That's probably the best problem a game can have. The music is top notch, the visuals are great for a first year WonderSwan title, and the gameplay loop is one I'm always down for. Maybe someday an indie dev will give us spiritual successor to Buffer's Evolution for all 5 of us in the fandom. I'm setting my watch now. Please try to do it before I die. But until then, I'm glad this obscure hidden gem exists, and I got to share it with a few people, one of whom might actually play it themselves. Though as obscure games no one has heard of don't get many views, next time I'm covering a game everyone has heard of. I don't even need to introduce it, but I still will. Star Fox 64 3D for the Nintendo 3DS family of systems. You might be wondering why I'm covering this, but that's because Lilac Wars for the Nintendo 64 was one of my childhood hyperfixations, and I kept replaying it over and over and over well into my teenage years, and in addition to it being one of my favourite games of all time, it was the only reason I got a 3DS. I was that one person who pre-ordered Star Fox 64 3D and played it the minute the store opened. So yeah, let me hyperfixate way too long next video on a game that's like 5 minutes long.